Well, yes, indeed, that's what we're focusing on today, that disagreement between the Senate and the executive. Particularly, they say that the acting president needed to recant his comment that the Senate has no powers to screen the EFCC or the acting EFCC chair. We're joined by Mr. Sobo, who is a legal practitioner. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Good morning, and thanks for having me again.
Well, now, the latest is that the senator said we will not screen any nominees until he recognizes our powers, which is predicated on law, as they say, to screen nominees. But there are those who sharply disagree with the Senate, saying, look, the law is there. They quote Section 171 copiously, how they don't need to go back to the Senate. What do you think of this?
Well, let me just remind you that we've been here before, right here where I sat, when I said that when the executive started playing a game of chicken with the legislature, they can't win, okay? Because we have to respect what the Senate has to do as an institution, separating the institution from the person. Now, playing politics between these two aspects of our democracy is actually normal. There's nothing abnormal about it. But now we have to go beyond that now and look at this thing logically. I know about the constitutional requirements, but the distinction there that I said here was you have to distinguish between an agency and a commission. Now, EFCC is a commission. It has pseudo legislative authority as well. So this is different from just an ordinary agency. And then when you talk about the separation of powers, now you have to be careful there, because that is the essence of democracy, so that we'll have one aspect overlooking the other and putting checks and balances in place. If you look at the EFCC, now going forward, because when people start talking about the legal reasons, they try to turn logic on its head. They have to move beyond that and look at the policy, because the rationale behind those behind the law, and reach a conclusion. One, EFCC is a very powerful agency. It has prosecutorial powers, powers to arrest, power to detain, power to seize your property interimly, power of forfeiture. That's a super powerful agency now. What those people quoting that constitutional requirement will want us to believe is that such an agency should just be left to the whims of the executive.
That's not the problem. That's not the problem. They agree with that. All you've mentioned, they agree with it. As a matter of fact, the Senate agrees with you 100%. But what they do not agree is having Magu there.
Well, you know, we discussed that before. Having Magu there, people say, well, the president can appoint somebody in the acting capacity perpetually. That is again turning logic on its head, because we are not going to reinvent the English language. Whereas it's acting. Acting presupposes that something will follow to make that position permanent. So if you say, I said it before, once you present Magu to the Senate, and the Senate disagrees and does not approve that nomination, you got to move on.
Okay, before we get to that part,
what do you mean by? What do you mean by move on? Move on and remove him from there, or let him be acting forever?
No, you have to remove him. You can't be acting forever, because the law that requires him for confirmation has a rationale behind it. The rationale, again, we have to go to the issue of separation of powers. Now, you cannot leave such agency only to the whims of the executive. Okay. And that is why he has to go.
Let me cite that 171, which they predicate the argument on why they think that they don't need to go back to the Senate for confirmation of particularly the EFCC chair. It says 171, power to appoint persons to hold or act in the offices to which this section applies, and to remove persons so appointed from any such office shall vest in the President. And then decide subsection 2, it says the offices to which this section applies are namely A, Secretary to the Government of the Federation, B, Head of Civil Service of the Federation, C, which is the crucial one, Ambassador, High Commissioner, or principal representative of Nigeria. No, that's not the question. The question is actually D. Permanent secretary in any ministry or head of any extra ministerial departments of the government of the Federation, howsoever designated. And then E, any office on the personal staff of the president. So they categorize it and say, look, if you look at D, they say EFCC falls under that, and that's why they think it doesn't need to go back to the Senate.
EFCC falls under the extra ministerial appointment. One, again, you have to look at it logically. That section 171 is about the appointment power of the president. Nobody is arguing with that. The president will have the power to appoint.
And not subject to confirmation from the Senate of these positions.
No, that's not what it says.
For 171.
It says this position, extra ministerial agencies. Now, first you have to now determine if EFCC is an extra ministerial agency, right? Because extra ministerial means that agency is already under some form of supervision from a minister who must have been confirmed anyway. It says extra ministerial. Now, so you have to make that determination. Now, if you determine that it is extra ministerial, then you have to now go back to the EFCC law that says this position is subject to confirmation. So you have a conflict.
No, but they always tell us that when there's a conflict, which is superior? The Constitution is the ground norm.
The Constitution may be superior, but that has to be determined. You see, what the executive is doing in that regard is to usurp the power of the judiciary.
How?
The only entity that can determine that is the judiciary. That is what